Hey, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm really thrilled and honored to have with me as my guest Reece Hirsch, who's a partner at Morgan Lewis and has written not just one or two, but six thriller novels. Reece, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
So, Reece, let me start by asking you, when did you know that you had a penchant or an ability to write novels and something that is not easy?
Well, I always wanted to write novels, ever since I was a little kid. And I started out as a journalist. So I went to Northwestern Journalism School. I worked as a journalist for a couple of years. And I edited and published an arts and entertainment magazine in Atlanta for a couple of years. Then went off, sold it to the competition, and went off to law school. Journalism was always kind of a fallback, but in the back of my mind, all along, I always wanted to write a novel, and it took me a while to get there. I didn't really get serious about it till I was a young partner, sort of got through the associate ranks and all that hard work. Didn't really find the time to work on it then, but ever since, I've been pretty serious about pursuing my writing.
Well, how did you come up with let's start with your first book. How did you come up with the idea? How did you go about even writing it? I mean, this is not something you just do in one day, obviously. What was the process like?
Well, my first book kind of arises out of my experiences coming up through the ranks as an associate. And I wrote about A World I Know, which is a big San Francisco law firm. It's set in the San Francisco financial district, primarily where I work. And it's sort of a Grisham-esque kind of thriller, but it starts out with a young attorney a corporate attorney who makes partner in his law firm. And then basically everything imaginable goes wrong, and he ends up getting embroiled in an SEC insider trading investigation. There are Russian mobsters involved. Things get very, very difficult for him. And but it also gave me an opportunity to kind of reflect on the dynamics of law firms and sort of comment on sort of how law firms work and portray that kind of ambitious world of young associates who are spending all their waking hours trying to make partner and get ahead.
Now,
so it was a lot of fun. It took a while to get that first one done, though.
Yeah, I was going to say, how long did it take you?
Well, now I'm much faster because I've made a lot of the mistakes. But on my first book, that was the time where I was making sort of every mistake in the book and rewriting the manuscript from page one again and again, getting feedback from others. So it took me about 6 years, I guess, to write that first one.
And did you end up?
And I was lucky. I was lucky in that a lot of people end up putting their first attempt in the drawer, but I just kept revising and revising, and eventually I was able to land a literary agent, which is an important step in getting to publishers. And I was lucky enough to be published by Berkeley Books, which is a division of Random House. So that was all a lot of fun.
How were you able to land an agent? Because I understand as a first-time author, that's very difficult.
I got rejected a million times. If you don't have any connections in the book business, which I did not, you write a query letter and you basically describe, your book and why they should take you on. And agents are deluged with aspiring writers. So eventually you get one that's willing to look at a chapter, and then if they like that, they'll ask for the full manuscript. And I eventually got there and landed an agent, but it took a couple of years, several years. And during that process, I was still getting some feedback from agents who were rejecting me and sort of using that, those comments to refine my manuscript further. Because I realized when I first went out to get an agent, the manuscript probably wasn't quite ready. It needed a little more work. And eventually I figured out what I thought it needed.
Well, when that first book finally got published, was it pretty similar to the first draft, or did you end up having to rewrite practically the whole thing? How much change did it go through before you were able to publish the book?
It went through substantial changes, but there were certain elements that stuck with it throughout. But I learned, some basic mistakes, like, sometimes at one point I had a protagonist who was a little too passive. You need to have, in a thriller, you need to have a protagonist who is, the master of their own fate and takes issues on head on. And so, that was one thing. And the beginning chapter completely changed several times until I got one that I think was a grabber that got the attention of some people. And just briefly, that first chapter involved my protagonist, Will Connolly, showing up early at the office and seeing another attorney plunging past the window of his office at Fort Embarcadero in San Francisco.
Interesting. Well, as a writer, what do you find to be the hardest thing? Like, is it thinking of the story? Is it writing dialogue? What is the hardest thing for you as a writer?
Well, I think one of the hard things about thrillers is that you have to balance a lot of elements. For example, I certainly read literary fiction too, and I try to have strong characters that are well developed, but you also have to have a really quick pace, and you have to keep the action moving to keep a thriller reader involved. So, I think that's the challenge usually, to have a fast-moving story, but also keep the characters in focus and have characters that people get to know and feel for. You just have to keep entertaining readers constantly, because and that's sort of my mission as a thriller writer, to combine as many appealing elements as possible: a little humor, a little action, a little character development.
Now, do you find writing fiction very different from nonfiction? I mean, you were a journalist, so I assume most of the writing you've done professionally was more nonfiction. And what would you say about that?
Well, when I was a journalist, I was very influenced by the new journalism, the Tom Wolfe and Gay Talese and all of these writers who sort of brought fictional techniques to journalism. And that was one of the things that really interested me about journalism. So it was different, but maybe not as radically different as you might think.
Now, most people, after they publish a book, that's like a lifetime achievement. But then you've gone on to publish 6 books. Tell me a little bit about, obviously you must enjoy writing, but what motivated you to want to keep going?
Well, I really enjoyed connecting with readers and producing, a story that was, entirely pulled out of thin air. And I think you have to enjoy the process, and I did. Not that it's an easy process, but I decided that I wanted to, start over and write a new series, and that's what I did with my next book, The Adversary. And I was lucky enough to get, another deal with a publisher, this time with Thomas and Mercer, which is Amazon Publishing's mystery and thriller imprint. I was taken on for the Chris Bruin series, and Chris Bruin, the protagonist of the next 3 books I wrote, is a former Department of Justice cyber crimes prosecutor who, is in private practice as a privacy and cybersecurity attorney. And I know some folks like that. They've been my colleagues at law firms in the past. And it gave me a chance to draw on some of the interesting issues that I encounter in my privacy practice, because I'm the co-head of the privacy and cybersecurity practice at Morgan Lewis.
I see. Interesting. Now, are all your books legal thrillers, or did you end up diverging from that later?
Well, I guess I would say the next 3, the Chris Bruin series, are legal thrillers in a sense, because they have a lawyer protagonist, but they're probably better characterized as technology thrillers or cyber thrillers, because they really are, they're fast-paced and they touch upon a variety of scary technology issues. And then my most recent 2 books are not legal thrillers, because the protagonist is Lisa Tanchik, who's an FBI special agent who investigates cybercrime at the FBI. So,
well, for some of that other stuff where you don't have, say, firsthand knowledge, do you research it to figure out how to make up the stories, or how do you get the material then if it's not something you've personally done or worked on?
Right. For almost all my books, I have to do a good bit of research, even though the issues are often, drawn from things that I touch upon in my
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah.
You know, well, for my book Black Nowhere, I had to research quite a bit because that was my one book that is based on true life events. It's sort of a fictionalized account, Ross Ulbricht and his dark web marketplace, Silk Road. So I thought I was really fascinated by kind of the rise and fall of this bright young guy who started this marketplace with supposedly idealistic libertarian ideals and ended up as a criminal kingpin, ordering hits on people who threatened his criminal empire. So I found that story so fascinating, and I found it also paralleled a lot of classic Silicon Valley startup stories. And so that's one that I really dug deeply into, the operations of the dark web. I learned a lot about cryptocurrency, but for each book, there's something that I have to delve into. For my book, most recent one, Dark Tomorrow, I had to learn about US Cyber Command, the agency that defends the nation against cyber threats. Although a lot of that is obviously top secret, but I was able to glean a little from publicly available sources.
Well, obviously, for the research part of your books, I mean, that does tap well into your journalism experience, doesn't it?
It definitely does, and just like journalism, where you have to learn something new for every story, get the feel of a different world. The same is true of books. I take on a certain task and I spend time researching, and there's always something new that I have to, get a handle on, particularly because my cyber thrillers are often aimed at sort of what comes next, what the next big threat might be. So sometimes it's a matter of peering into the future a little bit. Like, for example, with my book, Surveillance, I dealt with quantum computing. And when I wrote that, I thought this seemed like pure science fiction, but a couple of years after it was published in 2016, Google announced its first successful test of a quantum computer. So it's not always easy to stay ahead of the curve.
Now, I'm assuming now that you've published multiple books, finding a publisher is easy, or do you still have to find a new publisher for every single book?
Well, it's never easy. The publishing business is a tough business. It's a tough game, and you have to constantly prove yourself with sales figures. And so I was lucky enough to have a 5-book run with Thomas and Mercer, the 3 Chris Bruin books and the 2 Lisa Tanchik books. And now I've written a new book, which is a little bit of a departure. Don't want to say too much about it, but my literary agent is reading it right now, and we'll be shopping it around, looking for a publisher.
I see. When do you expect that to come out?
Hard to say right now because publishing moves slowly. Particularly the big publishing houses. It can take nearly 2 years or more. To go from acquisition of a manuscript to actually seeing a book on the bookshelves.
So while you're shopping that current book for publication, are you already working on the next book, or you're not going to start that until this next book?
That's exactly. For writers, you've got to keep moving. Don't you just have to keep writing, and it's easy to get paralyzed if you just sit around and wait to sell one book before you start the next. So
interesting.
So you got to just keep going.
Do you find yourself like running out of ideas, or do you have the opposite problem where you have too many ideas and you don't know which ones to write about? Which problem is it?
I have plenty of ideas because usually it takes me, about a year and a half to write a book. So that's a long time. And, in the meantime, I'm stewing over other ideas. Things are occurring to me and jotting them down in my notebook. So, I've got plenty of, the main challenge is finding the story that I really want to spend a year and a half of my life obsessing over. So, and sometimes it may be a good story, but it's not one that I just want to live with like that. So
yeah, interesting.
That's often the challenge.
When is the best time for, what's the best time for you to write? Do you write like late at night? Do you go on a beach in Mexico and write for a solid week? What is your best time for writing?
Well, since I'm a practicing attorney with a busy practice, I tend to write in fairly small increments of time. And so early morning is good for me, and then weekend mornings. That's basically when I do my writing. And I used to ride the BART train into San Francisco to my office. And a lot of my writing, particularly in the early books, was done on my laptop, sitting on the BART train on the way into work.
Do you find that writing fiction just kind of flows pretty naturally, or are you really racking your brain to try to think of what to say next, or it just kind of flows out from you, would you say?
Well, yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm somebody who agonizes, over, getting words on the page, but it's never easy. Each word, each page, is hard work, but I don't get blocked like I hear some writers do.
Yeah.
And I envy the writers I know from conferences who are dedicating their time to writing full time. Having an entire morning or entire day to dedicate to writing. That seems like a luxury, but it would also be hard to concentrate for that long on writing.
Well, that was my next question. So at some point, will you give up, will you retire from practicing law and go into writing full time, or what is your plan?
It's definitely something I'm going to do in retirement, and I've been practicing law for quite a while now. I guess 34 years. So there will come a time when I'll retire and keep working away on these books.
Uh-huh. Do you think of a day where you'll write maybe some nonfiction or something else, or try a totally different genre? I don't want to give away any ideas, but will you always kind of stick to legal related privacy thriller type things, or do you envision like trying to do something totally different, murder mystery, or I don't know?
Yeah, I'm definitely I could definitely see me taking on other genres, in the mystery thriller space. Um, Nonfiction, I would love to do it, but I think writing fiction is challenge enough for me. So I think in my immediate future, I'm probably just going to keep trying to get better at what I do as a fiction writer.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Reece, I really appreciate your taking the time. It's been a wonderful conversation. I've interviewed a lot of nonfiction authors. I don't get to talk to fiction writers as much. And of course, one that is a successful lawyer is a double bonus. So I really appreciate your taking the time and sharing your story with me.
It was great talking with you, Richard. Thanks a lot.
This is Richard Hsu and Reece Hirsch. Thanks.